Coming up on New Day on Arirang. With South Korea expected to report over 500,000 cases this Wednesday, the total accumulated caseload will exceed 10 million. This means 1 out of every 5 South Koreans have been infected with COVID-19, less than 800 days after the first case was reported. Russian airstrikes hit the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, a city of 400,000 on Tuesday. Ukraine says the shelling has reduced the city to ashes of a dead land and comes just 1 day after Ukraine rejected Russia's demand to surrender. The South Korean government will announce today changes to the officially appraised home value rate for this year. It's expected to increase around 20%, potentially adding to the tax burden on homeowners.
Hello and welcome to this Wednesday edition of New Day at Arirang. I'm Kim Mo-gyan. Thank you for joining us.
And filling in for Mark Broom this week, I'm Lee Seung-jae. It's 8 a.m. in Seoul, Korea, March 23rd. Over the next hour or so, we'll take a look at the big news stories of the day and get expert insights on the issues facing Korea and, of course, the rest of the world. As we always do, we start off with the COVID-19 situation here in Korea. South Korea has seen its total number of COVID-19 infections surpass the 10 million mark.
In other words, 1 out of 5 South Koreans have at some point been infected. For more, we turn to our Shin Yoon, who's joining us live in the studio. Good morning, Yoon.
Good morning.
So we heard that the total number of cases in South Korea surpassed the 10 million mark yesterday. So how many cases are we expecting for today?
Well, Mo-gyan, we're expecting to see the daily tally go back up in the 500,000 range. As of 9 p.m. on Tuesday, we saw 475,276 new infections, which was the second highest tally ever recorded for this time period. So we're expecting to see the second highest daily figure on Wednesday. A week ago, we actually saw the highest tally going up as high as 621,000. Though today's figures aren't expected to be as high, they have definitely climbed up by something like 140,000 from a day ago. Usually Wednesday's figures act as a key barometer for the weekly trend compared to when the numbers are lower at the beginning of the week due to fewer tests done over the weekend. As you mentioned, as of Tuesday evening, South Korea has seen its total COVID-19 count surpass the 10 million mark. The exact figure stands at 10,411,816. In just a month and a half, the country added 9 million new COVID-19 infections due to the spread of both Omicron and its subvariant BA2, also known as stealth Omicron.
I mean, again, 10 million does sound like a big number, but when you put into a different perspective and say 1 out of 5 South Koreans, it's just a completely different view on this. Unfortunately, myself being at one point one of those 1 out of 5. But what we're finding out is that many of the South Koreans who've caught COVID-19, they're actually testing positive once again. So does that mean they've contracted the virus again?
I think this is a question many want to hear the answer to, and the answer is no. You will not be considered to have been reinfected even if you test positive in the first 45 days after you originally contracted the virus. In a briefing on Tuesday, health authorities said in order for one to be considered reinfected, 90 days must have passed. Citing data collected domestically and from abroad, authorities classified those who test positive in the first 45 days to have simply redetected the COVID-19 that they already had because reinfection rates are very low up to this period. It's only those who report symptoms or those who have traveled abroad and have tested positive with the PCR test overseas after 45 days who can be considered reinfected before the 90 days have passed.
Well, yeah, another question many are asking is that when will we be able to see the number of infections drop? So what do experts say?
That's right. So during Tuesday's briefing, health officials Hoon Young-rae said that it's difficult to determine at this point because authorities have just eased social distancing measures on Monday and because stealth Omicron is spreading like wildfire. Take a listen to what he said.
The proportion of stealth Omicron cases is rising in Korea, and when considering the fact that this subvariant is somewhat more transmissible than the original Omicron strain, we will have to wait and observe to make an accurate assessment on how the current outbreak may trend downwards after reaching its peak.
At the same time, Hoon Young-rae pointed out while we're seeing 30 times more COVID-19 infections than last December when Delta was leading another wave of the pandemic, the number of critically ill patients has remained quite similar.
Compared to the jump in new infections, we aren't seeing the number of critically ill patients go up that quickly because of the high booster shot rates, the low fatality of Omicron, and the administration of oral COVID-19 pills to those at high risk.
While the number of critically ill patients from COVID-19 has stayed in the 1,000 range, 3/4 of those have underlying conditions. Even though authorities said they would expand their medical capacity so that they could take care of 2,000 critically ill patients by late March, they urged for more efforts to be made on the booster shot front, especially for those at high risk.
That's right. I think a lot of people are still saying, why get the booster shot if you're going to get infected? But of course, I think there is still the very importance of getting vaccinated nonetheless. Yoon, as always, thank you very much for your thorough reports, and we'll see you again Thursday.
Thank you.
And we move on here, stay with COVID-19 related issues. The World Health Organization says numerous European countries have lifted their COVID-19 restrictions too brutally, from excessively strict to overly careless, leading to the latest spread of the virus.
This comes as the region reported over 5 million new infections during the past week. Kim Hyo-sun has this report.
The WHO says several European countries, including Germany, France, and Britain, have eased their COVID-19 restrictions too brutally. These countries are now witnessing a rise in new cases, most likely caused by the more transmissible BA.2 variant, nicknamed Stealth Omicron. Speaking during a press briefing Tuesday, the WHO Europe director said the virus is on the rise in many countries in the region, namely the UK, France, Italy, and Germany. The number of COVID-19 cases in Europe fell sharply after peaking in late January, but the region has been witnessing a virus resurgence since early March. Just last week alone, the WHO reported over 5.1 million new COVID-19 cases within the European region. South Africa is also easing antivirus measures, with masks no longer required when people are outdoors. The decision comes as the government prepares to lift the state of disaster and move on to the next chapter of the pandemic. Over in Asia, Japan has decided to end a COVID-19 quasi-state of emergency in all 18 affected prefectures amid a declining trend in the number of new cases. This is the first time since early January for the country to have no emergency measures in place. The move comes as the country's daily COVID-19 tally has hovered around the 20,000 mark for 2 straight days. Residents in the country's capital welcome the move.
I had a part-time job at a restaurant and the revenue decreased because of the COVID-19 quasi-emergency measures, so I'm glad it's over because now profits will increase.
Meanwhile, China has reported over 4,000 new cases for the second straight day as its zero-COVID strategy is confronted by an Omicron wave. With a large majority of the new cases reported in the country's northeastern province of Jilin, Chinese authorities ordered late Monday a lockdown of the city of Shenyang in neighboring Liaoning province. The industrial city of 9 million is preventing residents from leaving their homes without a 48-hour negative test result. Shanghai Disneyland Resort is closed again until further notice as the city is witnessing a rise in new cases. The country's financial hub has reported a 5th consecutive daily record for locally transmitted COVID-19 cases, with over 860 cases reported Monday, up from some 730 a day earlier. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea's Producer Price Index, a key barometer of future inflation, hit an all-time high last month. The Bank of Korea says the Producer Price Index in February came to 114.82, up 0.4% from a month earlier. It's an increase for the second month in a row, and compared to a year earlier, it jumped by more than 8%, rising on year for the 15th consecutive month. The central bank attributes the rise to industrial goods, particularly coal and petroleum products, due to soaring global oil prices and other raw materials. South Korea's Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport will announce today the changes in the officially appraised home value rate for this year. Last year, the price increased by more than 19%, while it's expected to increase by around 20% this year. If the price increases, the burden on property tax could increase, while health insurance premiums, which are calculated based on the housing price, could also increase. Meanwhile, the focus will also be on whether the government will freeze property tax for single homeowners.
Now, President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol has called for financial support to help small businesses hit by COVID-19 social distancing measures. Now, he tasked his transition team to develop the best way to provide that very relief. For this, Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korean President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol called on his team to work to finalize an extra budget bill for COVID-19 relief. On Tuesday, addressing the branch leaders on his transition committee, he said the country needs to find a way out of the current hardship for small businesses.
소상공인 자영업자 손실 보상 방안에 대해서 좀 구체적인 좀 프로그램을 좀 만들어 주시면은 좀 빠르면은 현 정부에다가 추경 요청을 할 수도 있고 뭐 안 들어주면은 정부가 출범하면서 바로 준비된 추경안을 저희가 국회에 보내는 그런 방안으로 해서.
Since the election campaign, Yoon has been calling for an extra budget of more than $40 billion. He pledged that when he takes the office, he will be able to get this amount passed, saying the last one of around $13 billion was not enough. As for the Democratic Party of Korea, now in power and soon to be in opposition, the head of its emergency committee, Yoon Ho-jung, said earlier in the day that as long as People Power Party is willing to talk, it's prepared to pass an extra budget bill together. This means if the two parties can come together, a bill could be passed as soon as April. The chairman of the president-elect's transition committee, An Chul-soo, who is also head for the special branch for COVID-19 response, said the details of the extra budget are still in the works.
The president-elect has so far pledged $40 billion, but the first thing to do is to really calculate the exact losses in detail. When that's done, we can provide compensation accordingly.
He also said there's a need to address the immediate concern of loan payment deadlines for small business owners, many of whom face a deadline this month for the most recent extension. Members of Yoon's team will be speaking to the country's financial institutions as early as Wednesday to see what they can do to extend the deadlines. As for worries about COVID-19 relief leading to stagflation, Chairman An said there are many ways to compensate small businesses, including cash payments, loans, and tax waivers, so they're going to come up with measures that will have the least impact on the economy. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Now it's time for On Point, where we speak to experts to delve deeper into the biggest news stories in the spotlight right now. Of course, one of the biggest criticisms of the current Moon administration has been its dealing with the skyrocketing real estate prices. Of course, despite dozens of measures put in place, it has become even harder for many to achieve their dream of owning a home.
And even for single homeowners, tax burdens remain an issue, with both parties looking to resolve the problems regarding tax burdens and the skyrocketing real estate market. We'll get an expert view on how things will pan out moving forward. For this, we're joined by Professor Oh Jun-seok from the Business School at Sookmyung Women's University, joining us via Skype. Good morning, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Well, first off, there will be a lot of focus on how the next administration will deal with real estate policies. So which of President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol's real estate pledges stand out the most for you?
President-elect Yoon has promised to lower property taxes and ease regulations on loans and redevelopment, ramping up residential real estate supplies in the long term. I might say four main components of real estate pledge are supply-side-driven policy, real estate tax reformation, and revitalizing rental housing business, and finally preventing speculation. Out of four, I'll choose real estate tax reformation as the most outstanding, returning to the normalcy of real estate utilization. Real estate tax reformation consists of two changes. First, merging comprehensive real estate tax into personal property tax, and second, to postpone heavy taxation and transfer tax for multiple homeowners. Within the framework of market mechanism aiming at efficient resource allocation, tax is considered as market friction, a source of inefficiency. Other things being equal, the less tax is the better policy. Overmore, there is an argument among tax experts violating Constitution when it comes to comprehensive real estate tax law. In this sense, it is appropriate to simplify the real estate tax and as a policy tool for inducing changes by market choice and let the side door open to make an exit from the market by lessening the tax burden. It is very to the point.
So, Professor, what we know so far is that the BOK will end up increasing its key interest rate further later down this year. Could this have a more significant role in controlling the skyrocketing housing prices, or will it indeed be the incoming Yoon administration and the President-elect Yoon Suk-yeol and his pledges that will impact the housing market more?
Both could help to control the real estate price by pressing down the speculative motivation. Reference rate in an economy is of great importance because it may be reflected in cost of capital. Real estate fund for speculation had been made by maximizing bank loan at about 1%, almost zero cost. This is financing technique is also called the high leveraged financing or thin capitalization. When the operating return is greater than the cost of capital, positive profit is guaranteed, so-called arbitrage profit. This market situation is made not by market, but by the monetary policy. And this is how speculative capital moves into the real estate market. As a result, market choose action for the best under given condition, prices soared while household debt from the bank maximized. Interest rate change would be one of the most powerful instruments. Now, the reference rate is 1.25%, would be held until the new administration takes office. It is supposed, in a way, to curb down the inflationary pressure and a way to control the real estate prices in urban areas. They will step up interest rate consecutively from May.
And Professor Oh, the ruling Democratic Party is looking to ease the real estate tax burden on single homeowners. And I heard there was a meeting this morning on this, and the Finance Ministry has decided to kind of maintain the current system for the meantime. So do you think the tax burden could be eased soon? And how will this affect the real estate market moving forward?
Simply speaking, as far as real estate policy is concerned, the government has lost public confidence. Up till recently, those who had kept to a single home by closely following the government guidance are subject to heavy property tax and cannot sell them due to higher capital gain tax from inflated prices. After recognizing politically disapproving atmosphere, the ruling Democratic Party has promised to return the tax on single home owners only to 2020 level. And as the spike in tax burden and housing price became the key cause of its defeat in the presidential election. And you mentioned that today in the morning, Ministry of Finance, they decide the tax exemption has widened to senior aged group. That is because comprehensive real estate tax burden is heavier than they simulated before. Now, many homeowners captivated in transfer tax demand opening exit equally from the real estate investment in a way to avoid a heavy tax burden. Without providing feasible procedures as a way out, the government went on rampage to levy the heavy tax. That is how many homeowners were upset, turning their back from the ruling Democratic Party. There comes increased political request that property taxes should be lessened afterward. It is, however, experts find the easing in property tax will be of little relief to the taxpayer, and they demand easing in the capital gain tax to facilitate the sale and increasing supply to bring down housing prices.
Professor Oh, you know, what's interesting is we have seen both the Democratic Party and the PPP clash over a number of different issues, but it does seem that the one common ground that they have is trying to tackle the skyrocketing housing market. you have the incoming Yoon administration. You still have the DP in control of the National Assembly. Can they really work together to eventually work together and try to tackle the housing price, the issue that all the citizens are facing right now?
I'm afraid not, because there is a slim chance of cooperation between the ruling Democratic Party and the president-elect. Real estate prices are one of the toughest problems the Yoon administration will face. They are showing signs of rising again after the presidential election, with expectations mounting for the relaxation of redevelopment and reconstruction and the easing of property tax. Monetary tightening should be paralleled with real estate policy, which is far from populism. Just because President-elect Yoon can hardly expect the cooperation of the Congress, they have to take a roundabout of deregulation and simplifying administrative processes. People are not asking to be house rich. They just want a home, and they just want rent to become affordable. Skyrocketing home prices are one of the biggest failures of the current administration. If this problem is not solved, the 5 years of the new government will not be smooth either.
So I guess we'll just have to see what happens moving forward. Professor Oh, as always, thank you very much for your insights, and we do look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
Now, hundreds of thousands are reported to be trapped in the besieged Ukrainian city of Mariupol. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be further explaining the humanitarian crisis at the NATO summit through a video address on Thursday. And U.S. President Joe Biden will also join talks at this NATO summit and apply more sanctions against Russia. Kim Yeon-sung with the latest.
A city reduced to ashes. Russian airstrikes hit the Ukrainian port city of Mariupol, home to 450,000 on Tuesday local time. According to Ukrainian officials, the strikes came a day after Ukraine rejected Russia's demand to surrender. Hundreds of thousands are reported to be trapped in buildings, running short of food and water. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday told the Italian parliament through a virtual address that there is nothing left in Mariupol and that the city has reduced to ruins like Armageddon. The same dire situation continues in Kherson, a city in the south of Ukraine that Russia captured earlier this month. Ukraine's foreign ministry says that 300,000 in Kherson are running out of food. Zelensky will be further demonstrating the grim situation in Ukraine on Thursday in a video address to the NATO summit. U.S. President Joe Biden is also expected to join talks at this upcoming NATO summit at Brussels. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan on Tuesday said that the president will work with allies to enforce more sanctions against Russia and tighten already existing ones. After the meeting, Biden is scheduled to travel to Ukraine's neighboring country, Poland, in a show for support. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has gone on now for almost 4 weeks since its first strike, and Western leaders have lately been worried if this will escalate into a full-blown nuclear war. According to Russia's TASS news agency, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Tuesday that Russia would only use nuclear weapons if its very existence was threatened. Kim Yeon-sung, Arirang News.
Russia's creditors around the world are closely watching for a possible wave of defaults on the country's debt payments amid the stringent sanctions in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. For a second time, the Russian government has managed to make its coupon payments to its international creditors. But that doesn't rule out a wave of missed payments in the coming weeks. Ji-young has the story.
Despite the unprecedented sanctions over its invasion of Ukraine, Russia appears to have avoided default for a second time. Reuters reports that a coupon payment to Russia's sovereign bondholders worth $66 million was processed on Monday. Unlike a payment due last week, which was not payable in rubles, this bond has a ruble fallback option, meaning that Russia was able to pay in its local currency. Last Wednesday, some fears about a default were relieved after Moscow paid a combined $177 million in interest on dollar-denominated bonds. After that, the Kremlin spokesman claimed Russia has all the funds necessary to prevent a default.
There cannot be a default as Russia has the funds, so any default that could hypothetically happen would be entirely artificial.
But the payments made so far represent only a fraction of the amount due in the next couple of weeks. Russia's central bank reserves overseas are now frozen, so it's not clear how long it can hold out. If a payment falls through, it would be Russia's first international default since the Bolshevik Revolution over a century ago. Not only is the Russian government struggling to get clearance for debt payments, default is looming for a number of Russian companies too. Russian steelmaker Arirang Group SA said Monday that it sent $18.9 million for a coupon payment, but for compliance reasons, the transaction was blocked by its correspondent bank. The Russian mining company Severstal PJSC has also reportedly been unable to pay its creditors, and its grace period expires later this week. 엄지영, Arirang News.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says North Korea works with a range of cybercriminals worldwide, including those from Russia. In a press briefing Tuesday following President Biden's warning of Russian cyber attacks, Sullivan added that the North possesses significant cyber capabilities. However, he did not provide further details. The North is set to operate over 7,000 trained hackers, many of them based in China and Russia. Now, no survivors found yet after a China Eastern Airlines plane with 132 people on board crashed into heavily forested mountains in Guangxi province on Monday. State-owned broadcasters CCTV says around 650 rescuers have been dispatched to the area, only to find wreckage of the plane but no survivors. Based on the footage of the accident, the Boeing 737 appears to have crashed after a near vertical dive. Boeing, the plane's manufacturer, announced it would cooperate with Eastern Airlines and provide any necessary support. And now we cross over to our Oh Soo-young for the Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Seung-jae. It is indeed time for Global Insight. Now, we can't live without water, that's a fact. 70% of the earth we live on is covered by it, and water also makes up 60% of our bodies. We consume water in an innumerable number of ways in our daily lives, yet 2 billion people worldwide do not have access to clean water, according to the World Health Organization. 1 in 3 lack access to safe drinking water, and 2 out of 5 people do not have a basic hand-washing facility with soap and water. What's more, we're running out of safe water, with water scarcity projected to rise in the decades to come. Now, World Water Day has been observed globally on March 22nd since 1993. And today on Global Insight, we will address the pressing need for fresh water in the world. And for this, we're joined by Kellyanne Naylor, Vice Chair of UN Water and Associate Director for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF. We also have joining us Claire Seaward, Global Campaigns Director of WaterAid, a leading NGO on water, sanitation and hygiene based in the UK. Very warm welcome to you both. And, well, let's start with you, Kellyanne, in New York. Now, the availability of water of the right quality, at the right time, and the place to meet environmental, economic and human needs. It all requires active water resources. Now, what does it mean for a country to be water poor or water stressed?
Great. Happy World Water Day, and it's a pleasure to be here. And I think when we look at this question, we can look both at the physical availability of water. We can look at whether or not we have enough water to meet the demand of the population from a resource perspective. But we can also see that it is related to economic water scarcity, which also means that water is available for people due to investment in the necessary infrastructure. infrastructure to make it available. And we need to bring these two elements together, the physical presence of water plus our availability to extract it, to be able to be water secure. But when we don't have those two factors, we become, as you said, water stressed. And this is a situation where there isn't enough water of sufficient quality to be able to meet the demands of people. And currently we estimate around 4 billion people, representing nearly 2/3 of the global population, experience water scarcity at least 1 month of the year.
Kellyanne, why is there such a scarcity of fresh water?
So you started off by saying that we live on a planet that is full of water. And indeed, that's true. But when we break it down, we know that only 3% of the world's water resource is actually fresh water. And of that 3%, 2% is stored in glaciers. And that leaves us with only 1% for our use. And of that 1%, roughly 70% actually goes to agriculture, leaving just 30% for industrial and domestic uses. So I think when you look at it, bringing the picture together, we actually have a very little amount of water that we need to use for many things that we hold dear to ourselves, both economic as well as the health and well-being of our populations. And that it's that multiple uses of water that makes this such a challenging issue, but also one of such critical importance for today's society.
Now, Claire, to bring you into the conversation, you've spoken about drug-resistant infections and how they're a silent killer of hundreds of thousands of people. Now, what are they exactly and how do they spread through dirty water?
So antimicrobial resistance, which is the more technical term for this, is essentially when you have diseases such as sepsis, pneumonia, diarrhea, cholera, which are all being treated with antibiotics. And the more that is done, the more that people become resistant to it. Now, in a number of cases, those diseases can be transmitted through dirty water, but equally, hand washing is a critical way to combat that spread of disease. Now, that itself is really problematic in the sense that lots of people, as you said in your introduction, don't have access to the clean water and sanitation and hygiene that they need. And in fact, when you look at hospitals in particular, they're the third biggest contributor to antimicrobial resistance. Now, in many parts of the world, they don't have the water, sanitation, hygiene they need in healthcare facilities. And in fact, 2 in 5 healthcare facilities around the world don't have facilities to wash hands. So what we have is a situation where dirty water is a transmitter, clean water and hygiene can help prevent it, but in healthcare facilities, we're actually seeing a real lack of that critical service. And that is something that as an international community and as governments around the world, we really need to come together to tackle.
And Claire, now your organisation for over 4 decades has been working to provide access to clean water and basic sanitation facilities to people around the world. Now, how critical are clean water and hygiene practices to global development?
It is a fundamental building block to how countries can grow and develop, and people can grow and develop. And you can look at it in several ways. One is that from a health perspective, as we've been talking about, and as has been in your news bulletins today, it's really about how do you keep people healthy. And good water, sanitation, and hygiene has a real role to play in cutting things like pneumonia cases and cutting diarrhea cases. It's also a way to increase people's ability to engage in work. So good sanitation facilities in a business or in an employment situation can reduce absenteeism, it can increase productivity, and it can actually help improve gender equality. And finally, it's a really good return on investment. So we released some research last year that showed that if you invest in water, sanitation, hygiene services, you can get up to 21% return on that cost of investment in terms of benefit. So really, it's a fundamental building block in terms of how people grow and engage in the world and how economies and countries can grow and develop.
And Kellyanne, now, what is the importance of having access to clean water in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals that the world is working towards by the year 2030?
Yeah, I think we like to say that water is really the connector of all of the sustainable development goals. And there are 17 of them. And when we look at how water is present, it's present both in health, when we look at SDG target 1 and 2 on poverty and health and nutrition, gender equality, all of the different natural resources, life in oceans, life on land. So we really see that it's part of so many of those goals. But I think one thing we also recognize is that the success of the whole sustainable development agenda is really going to depend on the success that we have with water. And while there's good news that over the past 20 years has been a time of tremendous progress, where billions of people's lives have been transformed by having their human rights to water and sanitation fulfilled, and we see positive signs around the recognition of the importance of the management of water. The bad news is that we are still very much off track to reach this vital goal. And currently we know that around 2 billion people still lack access to safely managed drinking water, for example. So we're really going to have to speed up our progress, and we've estimated that we'll have to speed it up by a rate of around 4 times our current rate of progress to be able to achieve the targets that the world has set on water. And this is going to really require significant increase in the amount of resources that are being invested at the current rate.
And of course, the availability of safe water, the situation is all the more precarious for the particularly marginalized sectors of society, women and young children. Now, Claire, what role does clean water play for the human rights and the empowerment of young girls in particular?
If we're serious about girls' development and opportunity, then you absolutely have to be investing in water, sanitation and hygiene. When families don't have those services in the home, it's the girls and the women who are the ones who go off to collect the water and bring it back. That means that girls aren't in school. That means that women aren't at work. That means that they're missing opportunities. In South Asia, for example, 1 in 3 girls will miss some days at school because they don't have those facilities in the schools. And equally, in terms of maternal health, a number of infections can be directly attributed to a lack of those services in either the home or in the hospitals and lead to deaths. So actually what we're seeing is girls and women pay the price either through opportunity or sometimes even their lives. And so if we're going to really give opportunity and space, we really need to be investing in this.
And Kellyanne, well, it's really important that countries manage their water resources very carefully, but what are currently the biggest challenges that they face?
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, I think the challenges certainly abound in this area. And I think, one, we've touched on already that water is both a critical and a scarce resource. So this is kind of the first one, that it is scarce. And many countries actually don't have available data on the water resources that they have, because we know that water is also found, of course, in groundwater. And many countries don't have accurate estimates on their groundwater supplies or the rate at which groundwater is being extracted. And I think the other issue is of course, the quality of the resources. And as we see degradation, pollution, around almost 50% of wastewater is not treated before it's released into the environment, which brings pollution, ecosystem degradation, and also, of course, with changes in climate, we see sea level rise, which can bring fresh water. It can have saltwater intrusion. We can also see that as there's a rapid population growth and urbanization in certain areas, that the water infrastructure may be inadequate or non-existent to be able to deliver water to users. And I think, what we're seeing is that while we have this increasing demand, this, alongside with changes in climate, many of which can be felt through water, through droughts, through different extreme weather events that can also damage water infrastructure, that this can also lead to conflict. And this is one of the areas that the United Nations is very concerned about, whether it's conflict at a community level between different water users, which could be herders, farmers, towns. It could even happen between states. Some of the conflicts that we've seen over water rights, for example, in the Western United States, or even between nations and transboundary waters. Right now, there's only 24 countries in the world that have reported that they have governance arrangements that monitor how they are sharing waters, rivers, lakes, and aquifers to be able to cooperate on the use of those water resources. So I think it's a real range of both kind of people-driven factors, the economy, but also politics and water policy that are the challenges that are facing many countries around the world.
And Kellyanne, well, in order to overcome these barriers, would there be any innovative tools or practices that could be used?
Yeah, I think we're seeing really exciting progress being made in terms of innovations and in terms of good examples, whether it's from a community level where we see, for example, examples where schools are bringing up innovative greywater treatment and reuse systems so that students are learning about how to be able to treat water and reuse it in a school setting. We see other kind of high-tech examples where countries, for example, an example I know about with Ethiopia, where they're using satellite data to be able to identify new sources of fresh water and to be able to drill to reach them more efficiently. We're also seeing groundwater monitoring, being able to, put in place more sustainable extraction methods in countries like, for example, Madagascar. And we have some examples in Bangladesh where an organization, UNICEF, has been engaging with partners in a managed aquifer recharge project to be able to look at how to take treated water and rainwater to be able to improve the storage for future use. So I think these are just a few, and I think we're really excited to see both how countries and communities are coming up with innovative solutions that are meeting the needs of today, but also protecting the resource for tomorrow.
And of course, civic organisations and NGOs have been playing a big role in doing this. And well, Claire, what has your organisation WaterAid been doing to promote clean water and sanitation for people around the world?
So we work in 28 countries around the world, particularly in Africa and Asia and the Pacific, and in parts of the Caribbean, Latin American Caribbean, and helping tens of millions of people, either through working with communities and local organisations in terms of actually helping to provide those services. And in some cases, that includes things like healthcare facilities. We work a lot with governments to help them strengthen their governance and actually help put in place the monitoring and the management to make sure those wash systems are sustained going forward and they have the resources in place and the planning in place. And we also work with organisations across the world to think about how we can rally the level of resources and the skills needed to actually make the difference that we need to see at country level. So working with the UN, working with donor countries, working with institutions to see how we can actually make that progress that Kelly mentioned we really need to see if we're going to meet the Sustainable Development Goal on water.
Well, I'm afraid this is where we'll have to wrap up the interview. That was Kellyanne Naylor, Vice Chair of UN Water, and Claire Seaward, Global Campaigns Director of WaterAid. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Vaccinated individuals arriving in South Korea no longer have to self-isolate for 7 days. Still, a negative PCR test is required. This has led to a huge increase in sales of travel-related products and services. Kim Bo-kyung zooms in on this phenomenon.
Foreign travel is finally possible again. As the week-long quarantine on arrival measure in South Korea was removed starting Monday, travelers either on overseas business trips or on vacation say they feel much more comfortable.
When coming back from business trips, I felt very uneasy because of the quarantine period. Now that it is gone, I feel much more comfortable going on a trip. I hope to go on a trip to another country during my vacation too.
People's desire to travel abroad can be seen in recent travel package and ticket sales. According to major travel agencies' recent data, after the health authorities announced the changes on March 11th to exempt those fully vaccinated from having to quarantine for 7 days, sales of travel packages have soared. Hanatour says 3,200 reservations were made for travel packages between March 11th and March 20th. That is a 93.7% increase from bookings that were made over the previous 10 days. The Pacific islands of Guam and Saipan were the most preferred travel destinations, followed by Europe and the Americas. Bookings for plane tickets to overseas destinations are also on the rise. 7,300 people booked plane tickets from March 11th to 20th, which is more than a 60% increase from the 10 previous days. Another travel agency, Motor 2, is seeing similar increase in trip package sales and plane tickets. Sources say that they expect sales to increase even further.
We are looking forward to more bookings in the future as preventive measures are being loosened in other countries. Airlines are now reopening regular flights too, so we are expecting the number of trips overseas to go up.
Travel packages and plane tickets are not the only things enjoying a sales increase. eMart, a subsidiary of South Korean retail giant Shinsegae Group, said on Tuesday that it saw a 42.4% increase on-year in sales of travel suitcases, including carriers and portable bags, between March 12th and March 20th. Meanwhile, Incheon International Airport Corporation too is gearing up to welcome travelers and is expecting the demand for flights to properly recover starting this July. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea has now legally committed to achieving carbon neutrality by the year 2050. President Moon signing the Carbon Neutrality Act into law, which will also require the country to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the end of this decade. Kim Sung-min provides a glimpse of what to expect.
The Carbon Neutrality Act is now officially a law in South Korea, with President Moon Jae-in signing the bill during a cabinet meeting on Tuesday. According to the Environment Ministry, the law will come into force on March 25th. The bill had been passed by the National Assembly in August to form the legal foundation for South Korea's carbon neutrality goal. This makes South Korea the 14th country to legislate its commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050, joining the likes of Canada, France, and the UK. Under the law, South Korea set its nationally determined contribution as 40%, meaning that the country aims to slash its greenhouse gases by 40% of its 2018 levels by 2030. This is higher than the 35% target that had previously been passed by the National Assembly. The law also holds both the central and provincial governments to come up with their own plans to contribute to reducing carbon emissions within 1 year of the bill coming into force. The private sector will join the efforts as there will be a newly formed committee gathering public opinion while overseeing the overall progress. The new law is expected to propel South Korea towards its carbon neutral plan in accordance with the 2015 Paris Agreement by having binding power. Some experts, however, warn that this also means more burdens for local firms.
Setting a goal with a solid figure will put pressure on firms as they now have to work on reducing carbon emissions. This will be the case especially for public enterprises as they have to contribute more and prove it with data.
The expert also added that supplementary measures to strengthen research and development in renewable energy should follow to help the country maintain a stable source of energy amid coal phase-outs. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
Good morning. Wear a face mask that can block fine dust today. Most of the western parts of the country will have stuffy air again, and it's forecast to be even dustier tomorrow. Well, despite the dust, we're going to have temperatures that are a few notches lower than yesterday, so roller coaster temperatures continue. Meanwhile, a big warming trend should start tomorrow. Spotty rain is in the forecast on Jeju Island for the earlier part of the day, while morning temperatures are a couple of degrees higher than the same time yesterday under lots of clouds this morning. In highs will be 1 to 3 degrees lower this afternoon, so Daegu and Gwangju will be going up to 12 degrees Celsius. Well, we've had colder than normal temperatures lately, but we did have unseasonably mild March temperatures earlier, which will bring the cherry blossoms out 5 to 13 days earlier than the average year. And here in the capital, we're forecast to see the first bloom possibly next Monday, and peak bloom will fall around the week after the first bloom, usually lasting a week or two, depending on how the weather plays out. With that, here's a look at the weather conditions around the globe.
And that's all we have for now. Seung-jae and I will be back for another episode of New Day at Arirang at 8 a.m. Korea time on Thursday. I'm Kim Mo-kyan.
And I'm Lee Seung-jae. Have a great day. Thanks as always for joining us. And of course, take care.